The wine critic who praised my wife's intoxicating chemistry with our new sommelier didn't realize he was describing an affair funded by my mother's inheritance, but by the time he finished talking, I knew exactly how to leave them both with nothing but empty bottles. The James Beard Foundation reception glittered with the kind of people who could identify a wine's vintage by swirling it under gallery lighting while discussing inflation-adjusted Bordeaux futures. I stood near the silent auction, checking my phone for updates from Confluence, my restaurant, where Saturday night service should have been in full swing. My wife, Elena, had texted an hour ago, running late. Wine delivery crisis. Meet you there by 10. For 8 months, there had always been a crisis. A supplier emergency. A last-minute tasting. A crucial meeting that couldn't wait. Elena had become a ghost who left lipstick-stained wine glasses in the sink and came to bed smelling of oak barrels and expensive mistakes. She's building something extraordinary, I'd told myself, lying awake at 3 a.m. while she showered off the scent of wine cellars and lies. Managing a Michelin-starred restaurant means sacrifice. I'd sacrificed plenty. My mother's $200,000 inheritance, invested in Elena's vision for a world-class wine program. A second mortgage on our home. My own dreams of opening a pastry atelier. I'd become the supporting actor in Elena's culinary theater, and I'd played the role with dedication. Have you ever been so busy perfecting creme brulee that you missed the signs your entire life was being caramelized and served to someone else? A man materialized beside me, velvet blazer, press credentials, the glazed confidence of someone 4 drinks past professional. Mitchell Ashworth. I recognized him from his byline in Palate and Pour, the industry's most influential wine publication. He'd written 3 rapturous reviews of Confluence in 6 months, each one making Elena sound like a vinous prophet. Hell of a spread, he said, gesturing at the reception with a champagne flute. You connected to one of the nominated places. Thomas Brennan. Confluence is mine. His eyes widened with drunken delight. No fucking way. Dude, your restaurant, he caught himself, lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Okay, real talk. Your desserts are solid. Professional. But that wine program. That's not your wife running that show, man. That's all Cameron. The floor seemed to tilt slightly. The ambient noise of the reception, laughter, clinking glasses, self-important conversations, became distant and muffled. Cameron Voss. I kept my voice level, neutral, the way I spoke when checking if a soufflé had fallen. The sommelier, yeah. The guy's a legend. Mitchell leaned closer, his breath a mixture of Grand Cru and poor judgment. I was there last week for a vertical tasting. You'd already left, early prep for some pastry thing, I think, and I stayed late to interview Elena and Cameron for a feature piece. He paused to drain his champagne and immediately acquire another from a passing server. Listen, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but you seem cool. The chemistry between those two. It's fucking electric. They communicate without words. They taste the same notes in wines that should be impossible to parse. Elena literally told me, and I quote, I've never felt more understood than when I'm in the cellar with someone who speaks my language. Each word landed like a knife between my ribs, precise and cold. They're dedicated to the craft, I offered, buying time while my brain recalibrated reality. Dedicated. Mitchell laughed, loud enough that several people glanced over. They're obsessed with each other. I watched them taste through a 2005 Domaine de la Romanée-Conti, and I swear to God, it was more intimate than most sex scenes. The way he'd pour, the way she'd close her eyes and let the wine sit on her palate, the way they'd lock eyes and just, no. He shook his head admiringly, completely oblivious to the fact that he was describing my wife falling in love with another man. Cameron's opening his own place in Manhattan next month. Prime Soho location. I heard, and this is strictly off the record, that Elena might be joining him. As a partner. Mitchell's eyes gleamed with gossip. Apparently she's ready to leave the Midwest behind. Told Cameron she's been trapped in a marriage of convenience with a man who thinks raspberry coulis is the height of sophistication. The words hit differently than the others. Not knives now, these were serrated, twisting. Mitchell kept talking, his words tumbling out in an alcohol-lubricated stream. There's this whole plan, see. They've been systematically building capital. Cameron knows these Burgundy importers, gray market stuff, totally legal but insanely profitable, and they've been flipping allocated wines for double, sometimes triple the price. Smart, right? Build the nest egg, then fly to New York and leave the dead weight behind. Dead weight, I repeated softly. Her words, not mine. I mean, no offense, I'm sure you're a great guy. But Elena said she married you when she was young and naive, before she understood what she really wanted. She said you're stable and kind, which is basically the kiss of death for passion, you know. I knew. I was learning exactly what I was worth in my wife's estimation: stable. Kind. Dead weight. Cameron sounds successful, I said, still fishing, still gathering intelligence. Where did he work before Confluence? Oman, he was head som at Oriole in Vegas. Huge operation. Mitchell's expression shifted, his eyes darting around as if checking for eavesdroppers. There was some drama when he left, something about a relationship with the owner's wife and some missing investment funds. Nothing was ever proven, but you know how restaurant gossip works. The owner just quietly let him go rather than deal with a scandal. My hands, which had been resting calmly at my sides, slowly curled into fists. Anyway, Mitchell continued, blissfully unaware he'd just handed me a grenade. Elena must trust him completely to give him so much control over your finances. Smart woman. Sometimes you have to invest money to make money, right? Right, I agreed. Sometimes you invest everything. My phone buzzed. Elena, crisis resolved. Too tired to make the reception. See you at home. Love you. Love you. I excused myself from Mitchell, walked through the reception hall's massive doors, and stood in the November cold of downtown Chicago. The wind cut through my suit jacket, but I barely felt it. I was too busy recalculating 8 months of my life through a new, horrifying lens. The late nights. The mysterious wine shipments. The second mortgage she'd insisted we needed for inventory investment. The way she'd restructured our business accounts so she had sole signing authority for efficiency. The credit card statements with charges from boutique hotels in wine country that she'd explained as necessary for building supplier relationships. I'd believed her because I loved her. Because I was the pastry chef, the technical, detail-oriented one, and she was the visionary who'd transformed my adequate restaurant into something critics called transcendent. I'd been the stable one. The kind one. The dead weight. I took out my phone and called Michael, my accountant, who answered on the second ring with a yawn. Thomas. It's almost midnight on a Saturday. I need you to pull every financial record for Confluence and Elena's accounts. Every transaction, every transfer, every invoice. Tonight. The yawn disappeared from his voice. What's wrong? Everything. I think my wife has been embezzling from our restaurant to fund a new life with her sommelier. I need to know how bad it is before she realizes I know. There was a long pause. Jesus, Thomas. Okay. This is going to take a few hours. Where will you be? In my car. Waiting. I sat in the parking garage, watching the digital clock on the dashboard tick forward. Around me, other reception attendees trickled out, laughing, drunk, celebrating their various culinary triumphs. I wondered how many of them knew. How many of them had been to Confluence, had seen Elena and Cameron together, had recognized what I'd been too trusting, too boring, to see. At 2:17 a.m., my phone rang. Thomas. Michael's voice was carefully controlled, the tone he used when delivering very bad news. You need to sit down. I'm sitting. In the past 8 months, Elena has transferred $473,000 out of Confluence's operating account into a private LLC called Voss Consulting Group. The payments are documented as Wine Acquisition Consulting Services. The number hung in the air like smoke. $473,000. That's not all, Michael continued, his voice tighter now. The wine inventory listed in your books, the investment-grade Burgundies, the aged Barolos, the Bordeaux futures. I cross-referenced the physical inventory photos Elena submitted for insurance purposes against current wholesale databases. Thomas, those bottles don't exist anymore. She sold them and replaced them with mid-tier alternatives. You're serving $20 wine that your menu lists at $200. My vision blurred. I pressed my palm against my forehead, trying to process the magnitude of the theft. Your mother's inheritance specifically, the $200,000 from her trust, that was supposed to be restricted to educational purposes or your primary residence. Elena violated the trust by diverting it to a separate business entity. That's not just betrayal, Thomas. That's potentially criminal fraud. What else? I asked, because I knew there was more. I could hear it in his breathing. She signed a lease 3 months ago. Commercial space in Soho, Manhattan. 6,500 square feet. The deposit was $90,000, withdrawn from your joint savings account. The lease lists Cameron Voss as primary tenant and Elena Brennan as operating partner and co-owner of the entity, Voss and Brennan Wine Bar. Voss and Brennan. Not Brennan and Voss. I was the ampersand in my own marriage. Can we stop her? My voice sounded strange, calm, almost clinical. She has legal signing authority as co-owner of Confluence. Technically, everything she's done exists in a gray area between unethical and illegal. But the trust violation? That's prosecutable. And if we can prove she knowingly replaced inventory while maintaining fraudulent insurance claims, that's wire fraud. He paused. Thomas, I can freeze everything, force an emergency audit, and file for injunctive relief. But it's going to get ugly. Have you ever felt the exact moment when grief hardens into something sharper, when betrayal crystallizes into purpose? Make it ugly, I said. Freeze every account. File every paper. And Michael. I want Confluence. All of it. Whatever it costs, whatever it takes, I want her name erased from everything we built. That's going to be expensive. She already stole expensive. Now I'm buying back what's mine. I didn't drive home. I drove to the restaurant, let myself in through the back entrance, and descended into the wine cellar, the cellar that had cost me my mother's legacy, my savings, my marriage. The racks were full, but as I examined bottles, Mitchell's drunken truth revealed itself in the labels. These weren't the 2005 Romani Conti or the 1982 Petrus. These were clever substitutes, Burgundies from generic appellations, Bordeaux from forgettable years. Shell game wine. Con artist inventory. In the small office adjacent to the cellar, I found Elena's handwritten ledger. Every bottle sold. Every substitution made. Every dollar transferred to Voss Consulting. She'd kept meticulous records, perhaps planning to claim business expenses. Perhaps just arrogant enough to think I'd never look. I photographed every page. As dawn broke over Chicago, I drove home. Elena's car sat in the driveway. I found her asleep in our bed, her phone on the nightstand. No passcode. She'd never needed one because she'd never thought I'd check. The messages to Cameron painted a picture more devastating than numbers ever could. Thomas suspects nothing. He's too focused on his precious tarts to notice we're building an empire. 3 more weeks and the Manhattan lease is ready. I can't wait to leave this provincial nightmare. You and me in Soho, that's the dream. I almost feel guilty. Almost. But he'll survive. He can open a bakery in the suburbs. Small dreams for small people. Small dreams for small people. I set the phone down exactly where I'd found it, went to the kitchen, and began making breakfast. Croissants from laminated dough I'd prepared days earlier. Fresh berry compote. Her favorite dark roast coffee. When Elena emerged at 8:30, wrapped in silk, she looked surprised. You're home early. How was the reception? I set a perfect plate before her. Enlightening. I met Mitchell Ashworth. The briefest flicker of panic crossed her face before the mask returned. Oh. What did Mitchell have to say? Everything, Elena. He told me about Cameron, about the wine program, about New York. About how you've never felt more understood. I poured her coffee with steady hands. He was drunk. He told your husband every detail of your affair and your embezzlement scheme because he had no idea who I was. The blood drained from her face. I've frozen all accounts. My attorney filed papers 3 hours ago. You violated my mother's trust, committed insurance fraud, and systematically stole from our business. Cameron's history at Oriole, the affair, the missing investment funds, is being reviewed by the Liquor Control Commission as we speak. She stood abruptly. You can't do this. I built that wine program. You stole $473,000 and replaced investment wine with cheap substitutes while serving customers fraudulent products. You're not a builder, Elena. You're a thief with a good palate. Her expression transformed, love falling away to reveal calculation. Fine. We split Confluence 50-50. I take my half, you keep your bakery. I smiled, and something in my expression made her step back. There's nothing to split. The prenuptial agreement your father insisted on, the one you laughed about, has a morality clause. Infidelity and financial fraud nullify your claim to any business started during our marriage. Confluence is mine. This house is mine. You get exactly what you brought into our marriage, nothing. I'd never seen Elena speechless. It was oddly satisfying. You're boring, she finally spat. You've always been boring. Cameron understands. Cameron is a con artist who's been fired from every major position he's held. Give him 6 months. He'll steal from you exactly the way you stole from me. I left her standing in the kitchen and drove to Confluence. My staff was arriving for prep. Maria, my sous chef, looked up with concern. Chef. You okay? I'm fine. But Elena is no longer with the restaurant. I'm hiring a new beverage director. Someone honest. Word spread. By noon, Cameron had called 11 times. I never answered. By evening, Elena had moved out. Her mother arrived with a U-Haul while I ran service. 2 weeks later, Mitchell Ashworth published a correction. Previous reviews of Confluence incorrectly attributed wine program to Sommelier Cameron Voss. Investigation revealed systematic fraud. Owner Thomas Brennan had no knowledge of deceptive practices. We apologize. Cameron's Manhattan lease collapsed when his background check surfaced. Elena called once from Indiana, her voice small. Thomas, I made a mistake. Can we talk? I thought of her messages. Small dreams for small people. I hope Cameron was worth it, Elena. I said quietly. Because I most certainly am. I hung up and felt something settle, not quite peace, but it's beginning. I hired Priya, a brilliant young sommelier overlooked by bigger restaurants. Together we rebuilt the wine program, honestly, transparently, with bottles we actually owned. 3 months later, Confluence earned its first Michelin star. Mine alone. I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by my team, and realized I was no longer supporting someone else's dream. This was mine. Earned. True. The stable, boring pastry chef had vanished. In his place stood someone who understood that trust without verification is just another word for naivety, and that the best revenge is success that tastes like victory, not bitterness. The finest chapters were only beginning. And somewhere in Indiana, Elena was learning what every sommelier knows: you can build an empire on lies, but eventually, the vintage gives you away.